Greetings everyone, I'll be presenting the study entitled Tenure Impacts on Livelihood, Income, Forest Condition and Equity of an Upland Community in Negros Occidental, Philippines. I'm Forester Nicole A. Nacionales and I would like to acknowledge my co-author Dr. Dixon D. Gavania. So this is the abstract of our study. The study examined the perceived impacts of the Integrated Social Forestry Program on the biophysical and socio-economic conditions of farmers in Barangay Patag, Silay City, Negros Occidental, Philippines. Specifically, it aimed to assess the perceived impacts of ISFP on local livelihood, income, forest condition, and equity, and identify the factors that are associated with perceived equity, and determine the relationships between perceived equity and ISFP goals. Data were gathered through surveys and a focus group discussion, wherein a total of 41 respondents composed the survey, while 6 key informants comprised the focus group discussion. Key findings showed that ISFP was perceived to have considerable beneficial impacts on livelihood and income resources. It also had positive impacts on forest condition, particularly in the perceived increase of forest cover. Some beneficial impacts were likewise noted for equity across dimensions such as gender, education, economic status, and membership. Finally, challenges in sustaining the program underscored the need for strategies to further enhance its positive impacts on the local community's social ecological status. The study first examined the trend of the forest resources in the Philippines starting from the early 15th century up to the end of the 1941. So, as shown here, the estimated size of the forest resources in the Philippines was at the 27 million hectares. So, the decreasing trend was also observed as the forest resources became 21 million hectares by 1900s or during the American regime. So by the end of the 1941, during the Japanese regime, the forest cover only became 17 million hectares. Due to this, the Philippine government imposed some changes in the policies and programs related to the forest resources. So by 1946, there was the Presidential Decree number 705, also known as the Revised Forestry Code of 1975. There was also an implication or establishment of different forestry programs that were inclined on assisting the upland communities that were heavily dependent on forest resources. So by 1975, we have the forest occupancy management. In 1976, we have the family approach to reforestation. In 1978, we have the communal tree farming. So these programs were collectively integrated into a single program known as the Integrated Social Forestry Program that was established in 1982. So this program aimed to address the challenges of the deforestation and upland development. However, some limitations of ISFP were found out by the different study and researches that were conducted in the different communities in the Philippines. So, with regards to those weaknesses and limitations of the integrated social forestry, this study aimed to examine how the livelihood, income, forest condition, and equity was perceived through the adoption of ISFP in the study site. So, basically, this study wants to assess the perceived impact of the ISFP on local livelihood, income, forest condition, and equity. The study also would like to identify the factors associated with equity and would like to evaluate the relationships of equity and ISFP goals, and lastly, to describe the issues and challenges of ISFP. In order to make this study possible, we have the study site in the Barangay Patag, Silay City, Negros Occidental. The study site was chosen because of its accessibility, size and area, good representation of an organized upland community, and adoption of various agroforestry technologies. So, the the barangay started to adopt the Integrated Social Forestry Program in 1982, and there was an association or people's organization that was established as part of the collective action of the upland farmers and the community in organizing as a way to resolve the issues within their area. So we have the Patag Farmers Integrated Social Forestry Association, commonly known in PAFISPA. So by their establishment or by the start of the organization, there were 136 individual CSE holders, but as of 2016, there were only 68 identified active members in the organization. So these were the data collection and focus group discussion that were conducted during the study. We had this Slovene equation in identifying the number of respondents. We also conducted survey to understand the socioeconomic and demographic conditions in the area and to have an outlook on the perceptions on the changes and impacts of ISFP made to life. So in order for this to become possible, we used a snowball sampling on our survey interviews, and the survey interviews were carried out in Tagalog and Ilonggo dialects. For the data collection and focus group discussion again, the information were validated using the FGT, and we also have the secondary data derived from different organizations and institutions that were close um, to the heart of the Silay City and the Patag's Barangay Patag office. So for the satellite image, we use the Hansen and the Google Earth in analyzing the spatial analysis of the forest condition in the study site. For the data collating and statistical analysis, we use the life as the indicator for understanding the perception of the respondents. We also use the descriptive statistics, and we also had the point biserial correlation and Spearman's rank order correlation coefficient test in understanding the relationship between the respondents' socioeconomic conditions and the perceptions on equity and ISFP goals. So, based on the study, we found out that most of the respondents were between ages 45 to 51 years old, and the representation of male and female was almost equal. And we also saw that the highest level of education completed is represented by those who did not accomplish elementary level education. Lastly, the greatest number of respondents were native to the area, and few of them were migrants who came from the nearby towns and provinces in pursuit of the livelihoods. So in figure 3, we could see here that the main livelihood of the respondents was focused to farming. So the farmers mostly practice agroforestry, particularly organic farming along sloping areas. So on this basis, we could see that the dependency on forest-based source of income is high. The figure 4 shows us that the community mainly relies on gardening, agroforestry, non-timber forest products, and charcoal making. There was a limited information on the estimated annual income pertaining to the non-forest based source of income because these income sources were considered limited when it comes to the availability on per seasonality, and some of this income are source of income are owned by other family members, and this may not be generated as part of the individual income of the respondents. So as shown here in figure 4, 68.3 of the respondents receive below 30,000 per year, and this is equivalent to below $629 per year. So based on the impacts of the ISFP on livelihood, we could see here that the respondents were able to secure a livelihood through ISFP. Based on the impact of ISFP on the ownership of assets, most of the perception of the respondents were leaning to the positive impact of ISFP on the ownership of assets. When it comes to impacts of ISFP on income, we could also say that the perception of the respondents on the sufficiency of income is sufficient, while the perception on the change of income was slightly increased. However, it is notable that there's also 36.6 respondents that stated that their income were still very insufficient. Based on the impacts of the ISFP on forest condition pertaining to the improvement of forest products, we could also see that there was an improvement or positive trend when it comes to this perception. Moreover, the improvement of environmental services was also perceived to be at the positive side, since the area of deforestation and the like was also decreasing, but the area of reforestation was increasing. So, overall, the impacts of ISFP on forest use and benefits was also perceived to be significantly improved. Using the images on the Google Earth and the application of Hansen, we could see here on the Landsat images that the forest gain during the period of 2000 to 2012 was improving. So, based on the impacts of ISFP on equity, we could generate the information that the gender, education, and economic status were perceived to be most equitable when it comes to membership in the executive council and leadership. Lastly, membership was perceived to be most equitable in terms of participation in the PO decision-making process. When it comes to the PO policies and overall view of ISFP implementation, there was also a positive perception that were agreed by the respondents. So, for the factors associated with perceived equity, the results of the statistical analysis tells us that the gender and sex, education and educational attainment, membership and number of years as a PISPA were not significantly related to each other. However, the economic status of the respondents was significantly related to the perception of equity on leadership, participation in community forestry activities, involvement in community forestry related livelihoods, and access to equipment. There's also a significant relationship or correlation observed with the level of participation in PO meetings and the sharing of costs and responsibilities. So, the study also implies that the fair representation and leadership roles and local participation has resulted in water clarity or cleanliness on water resources. Moreover, the perception of equity in terms of access to major forest-based resources was significantly related to the sufficiency of income and land. However, even though that we could analyze or we could generate information on the positive impacts of ISFP, there are also issues and challenges that were found out during the study. So, few of the respondents started to engage in non-forest-based livelihood as they have indicated that forest-based livelihoods were inadequate to provide income. The practice of selling land rights existed in order to cope up with the daily needs or the lack of the resources of income. The devolution of ISFP was not sustainable because of the limited technical and financial capacity of the local government. Lastly, there was an overlapping land use in Barangay Patag which added a conflict around the community development trajectories. So, in conclusion, ISFP helped increase forest-based livelihoods and ownership of assets in the community. Income was perceived to be increasing and sufficient. However, ISFP had a low impact because the program participants were still considered as poor. The forest conditions also greatly improved because of the collective efforts in the community, and ISFP had a high impact on the current condition of the forest. Lastly, equity was fairly shared to ISFP in terms of gender, education, economic status, and membership. However, as we have mentioned that there are still issues and challenges that were found out within the community, there is need to pursue some strategies to maintain and continuously improve the positive impacts on the socio-ecological conditions of the community. To do this, we have to develop alternative livelihoods to improve local income of the respondents. We also have to provide capacity building and organizational trainings to improve the leadership and local participation among PM members. And lastly, we have to conduct a participatory land use planning to harmonize rights, livelihoods, and development plans among local stakeholders towards ensuring ecological integrity and well being of the local community. Thank you very much.